The grocery store was unusually crowded that Saturday afternoon, the hum of conversation mingling with the beeps of checkout scanners and the squeak of carts rolling down the polished floor. But amidst the ordinary rhythm of everyday life, a storm was about to rise, one that would remind everyone who witnessed it of the power of judgment, forgiveness, and quiet courage. Near aisle 7, where the air smelled faintly of detergent and fresh bread, a 14-year-old boy named Jamal stood frozen, his small hands clutching a loaf of bread and a bottle of milk, items he had been sent to buy by his mother. His clothes were simple but neat, his sneakers slightly worn, his face open and gentle. Yet, in the eyes of one woman, all that mattered was the color of his skin. Before we go any further, if you believe in kindness, in second chances, and in judging people by their hearts instead of their color, please take a moment to like, comment, share, and subscribe to Kindness Journal. Your support helps stories like this reach more hearts around the world. Jamal had been standing in line quietly when he felt it, that uncomfortable prickle of ice boring into his back. When he turned slightly, a white woman in her mid-40s glared at him, her expression tight with suspicion. She wore a neat beige coat, pearl earrings, and held a designer purse close to her chest as if protecting it. Her name was Margaret, and she had always seen herself as a good person. She volunteered at church, baked cookies for the neighborhood kids at Christmas, and often told people she was colorblind. Yet in that moment, something ugly stirred beneath her polished manners. She noticed Jamal glance toward the exit, then looked down at the milk and bread again. Her mind didn't process it as nervousness or shyness, it translated it into guilt. As the line inched forward, Margaret's suspicion grew. She whispered something to the cashier, a young woman who frowned and glanced toward Jamal. He felt their eyes and shifted awkwardly, his cheeks flushing. The cashier spoke into her radio quietly. Moments later, a store security guard, a tall man with a sharp uniform and cold expression, appeared. People in line began to stare. Jamal's heart pounded as he tried to understand what was happening. He hadn't done anything wrong. The milk was sweating in his palm. The bread crinkled under his tightening fingers. Margaret pointed at him suddenly, her voice rising in righteous indignation. "I saw him," she said loudly. "He tried to put something in his jacket. He's stealing." The words fell like stones in the silent air. Heads turned. A few people pulled their carts aside. Jamal felt like the ground had vanished under his feet. His mouth opened, but no sound came. He shook his head quickly, but his voice broke when he finally managed to whisper, "I didn't take anything." The security guard stepped forward, his hand resting on his belt. "Son, I'm gonna need you to show me what's in your jacket." Jamal's chest tightened. He opened his jacket with trembling fingers, revealing nothing but a folded grocery list and his wallet. No candy bars, no stolen goods, nothing. The air seemed to still. But Margaret wasn't satisfied. "Check his pockets," she snapped. "Kids like him, they're clever." Her tone was venom-coated in fear. Just as the guard hesitated, a deep voice spoke from behind Margaret. It wasn't loud, but it carried authority that made everyone pause. "Ma'am," the voice said slowly, "I think you owe that young man an apology." Margaret turned, startled, and the color drained from her face when she saw who was standing behind her. The man was tall, dressed in a crisp navy suit, and wore a calm expression that somehow carried both power and disappointment. He was a black man in his early 50s, with short graying hair and eyes that held quiet strength. The store manager hurried over, his face pale with recognition. "Oh, Mr. Lawson. I didn't know you were here today, sir," he stammered. Several customers murmured. A few even gasped. Because everyone in that town knew who Richard Lawson was. He wasn't just anyone, he was the owner of the entire grocery chain. For a long moment, no one spoke. Margaret blinked rapidly, trying to compose herself, but Richard Lawson's steady gaze didn't waver. He looked at Jamal, who stood frozen, eyes glassy with unshed tears. Then he looked back at Margaret. "You accused a child," he said quietly, "based on nothing more than what you thought you saw. Or maybe, what you expected to see." His words weren't cruel, but they cut deeper than shouting ever could. Margaret's throat went dry. I was only trying to help," she stammered. "I thought." "You thought wrong," Richard said softly. "And sometimes, when we think wrong, it hurts people in ways we can't take back." The silence that followed was heavy. The security guard lowered his hand, shame flickering across his face. Jamal's lower lip trembled, his eyes darting between them. He hadn't realized who the man was either. Richard turned to the cashier and spoke gently. "Cancel that call to the police," he said. "This boy hasn't done anything wrong." He crouched slightly to meet Jamal's eyes. "What's your name, son?" "Jamal," came the faint reply. "Well, Jamal," Richard said kindly, "you did nothing wrong. Don't ever let someone make you feel small because of their fear." He took out his wallet and handed the cashier a $50 bill. "This should cover his groceries," he said. "And add something sweet for him, please." The crowd began to whisper, some visibly moved, others looking ashamed for not having spoken up. Margaret's eyes filled with tears. The realization of what she had done, how easily she had humiliated a child, hit her like a tidal wave. Her heart raced as she looked at Jamal, who was still clutching his mother's grocery list. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, stepping closer. "I didn't mean to." Richard interrupted gently, "Apologies are good, ma'am. But change is better." He turned and began walking Jamal toward the exit, one protective hand on the boy's shoulder. Margaret watched them go, her knees weak, her reflection in the glass doors looking back at her, not as the kind woman she thought she was, but as someone who had just been taught a painful truth. Outside, sunlight spilled over the parking lot. Richard led Jamal to a bench and sat beside him. "You handled that with more strength than many adults would have," he said quietly. "You kept your head high." Jamal looked down. "I was scared," he admitted. "I didn't want people to think I'm bad." Richard smiled faintly. "You're not. And don't you ever believe that you are. You see, I grew up in a place where people looked at me the same way that woman looked at you. I used to walk into stores and feel eyes on me too. But I learned that people's fear isn't your burden to carry. Their ignorance isn't your identity." Jamal's eyes shimmered. The weight that had pressed on his chest began to ease. Richard continued softly, "Someday, you'll have the chance to show someone else grace. When that time comes, remember how this felt, and choose kindness instead of anger." Back inside, Margaret lingered by the exit, tears streaking down her cheeks. She could still see them outside through the glass, the powerful businessman sitting beside the boy she had accused. The contrast tore at her heart. She had spent her life believing she wasn't part of the problem. But in that moment, she realized that good intentions meant nothing without self-awareness. Days later, that same grocery store buzzed with gossip and reflection. Many customers had filmed the incident, but Mr. Lawson had asked them not to post it online. "Let this be a lesson," he said, "not entertainment." Word spread anyway, and people began talking, not about scandal, but about humility, about the importance of seeing beyond assumptions. A week after the incident, Margaret returned to the store, holding a small gift bag. She asked to meet Jamal and Mr. Lawson. When they arrived, she took a deep breath and handed Jamal the bag. Inside was a sketchbook and a set of pencils. "The cashier told me you like to draw," she said softly. "I hope you'll use these to make something beautiful, something better than what I showed you that day." Jamal smiled shyly, his forgiving nature shining through. "Thank you," he whispered. Richard watched silently, his heart full. Margaret then turned to him. "You were right," she said. "Apologies are good, but change is better. I've started volunteering at a youth art center in town. I want to learn, not just talk." Richard nodded approvingly. "That's a start," he said. "Real kindness begins when we see the world through someone else's pain." The air in that store felt lighter that day, as if something heavy had finally lifted. People who had witnessed the event smiled at Jamal when they passed him. The same cashier who had once doubted him now greeted him warmly every time he came in. Margaret often brought him fresh cookies from her kitchen, and though they rarely spoke of that day, the quiet understanding between them told a story more powerful than words. Jamal grew older, carrying that memory not as a wound, but as a reminder. Years later, when he opened his own art studio, he hung a small plaque near the entrance that read, "See people for who they are, not what you fear." It became the motto of his life, one born from pain, yet rooted in hope. And Richard Lawson. He continued to mentor young people like Jamal, investing in scholarships, and quietly reminding the world that true leadership isn't about power, it's about protecting dignity. If this story touched your heart, please like, share,